What's up, guys? Diego from SGen. I want to talk about the main event of UFC 241, which is Daniel Cormier defending his title against the man he took it from, Stipe Miocic, and it was a phenomenal fight. And this card in general was just awesome. It was literally the main card was pretty much just a beast of a card, except for maybe the Pettis versus Diaz fight, which had its own intrigue because the whole time I was still entertained, like, what the fuck is Anthony Pettis doing being held against the fence by Nate fucking Diaz? So the entire fight, I was compelled to just think, what the hell is he doing? So how is this even possible, dude? How is this even possible? But regardless, the main event was a phenomenal fight as well. And of course, the whole storyline was in the first fight, Stipe, and I think this is pretty much fair to say, Stipe was winning the early parts of that first fight. And then DC landed a beautiful shot, knocked him unconscious, and took the belt and became the first two-weight world champion between light heavyweight and heavyweight, and easily putting himself as one of the greatest fighters of all time. Like, if there was any doubt, that fight pretty much put him in there. I'm not going to say he's the best because, of course, I think that John Jones, GSP, Anderson Silva, all these guys are ahead of him. But I definitely think that DC was among them. You know what I mean? He's definitely one of the elites, and he realistically has only lost to potential GOATs. Let's just think about it. Like, he's only lost to John Jones, now he's only lost to Stipe. So he's literally only lost to the greatest fighter to ever live and the greatest heavyweight to ever live. So there's zero shame in that. And realistically, man, like, if you look from a round-to-round basis, Stipe didn't win a single round, in my opinion, except for the one that he finished DC in. Like, in the first round, you could tell that Stipe had a different game plan. Stipe was being very, very calm. He wasn't going after DC. He was trying to counter him. He was trying to fight from a longer range a little bit. I'm not doing very well at it. He wasn't doing a very good job with his jab, but he was still trying to fight at a slower pace and kind of make DC come to him. And so instead of going into where DC is strong, which is the very, very short, close punches where DC can land uppercuts and he can land overhands. And of course some nice hooks as well in the clinch. So Stipe did a good job in terms of that when it comes to his game plan, but I think that once they started getting hit a little bit, that kind of changed. And most importantly, there was a point where DC lifted him over his shoulders, and what seemed like an eternity, he eventually slammed Stipe. And, you know, from then on, he was on top of him. He did a really good job of controlling Stipe, landing some ground and pound, and there were a few times in this fight where it looked like Stipe was pretty much done, but Stipe, ever the fucking monster, he survived, he came back, and he never really showed any ounce of quitting in him, and I think that's probably the thing that really makes him the greatest heavyweight of all time, is the simple fact that whether it's against DC, whether it's against Ngannou, there is no quit in the man. Either you turn off his lights, or he's just going to keep on going. He's going to keep on going. He has great cardio for heavyweight, and he's just a beast. He really is a beast. There is no weakness in that brain of his, and I think that he's just such a phenomenal fighter, but most importantly, a phenomenal human being. Like, you can like him, or you can love him, or you can hate him, but he's just got such a strong mind and an unbreakable will. So you have to really just give him credit for that. You know, you can't take that away from him. He's just a fucking animal. So, of course, you know, coming into that fourth round, DC was clearly winning the fight. He was putting a beating on him, but DC was looking a little bit more tired. And one thing to take into consideration here is that Stipe weighed in at 230 and DC weighed in at 236, which was for both of them the lowest they've ever weighed at heavyweight. So both of them were looking like they were trying to go for a bit more of course, a lighter approach, which means they're presumably both going to have some better speed, and they're both going to presumably have better cardio. That definitely stood out because I think that both of them kind of expected this fight to go long, and they did a good job of it. You know, they had excellent rounds, and of course the fourth round, it looks like Stipe, and apparently it wasn't even a matter of his cornerman telling him to go to the body. It was just a matter of Stipe realizing, watching tape over the various months and realistically a year, you know, understanding that DC does potentially have a weakness there. His chin is insane. Of course, John Jones knocked him out with a head kick, but was perfectly placed, and DC went literally straight to the head kick. So it was a very, very particular situation. But still, you know, he has a really good chin, but what have we seen happen to him over the years? Realistically, he's only been hurt one time, which was that shot by Anderson Silva, which basically bent him over in a fight where DC completely dominated, and all of a sudden one shot to the body by Anderson Silva, and he was looking like he was in a lot of danger. So I think that Stipe, as he mentioned in the post-fight press conference, he realized that could be a potential weakness in his game. And he, of course, went over to exploiting that, and he did a very good job of starting landing the body shots. And the weird thing about it is that DC basically just took every single one of them. I don't recall him even trying to block one. And I think that DC, even in the post-fight press conference, was talking about how the shots weren't really doing anything. Like, he didn't really feel like they were hard shots. They weren't doing damage to him. He wasn't feeling them. And all of a sudden, one landed, and he couldn't breathe anymore. And that's just what happens to these shots. Like, you can take a lot of them, but when you get hit by the perfectly placed shot, it doesn't matter how strong it is, it doesn't matter who's throwing it, it doesn't matter It doesn't really matter how fresh you are. It just does not matter. Once you get hit by a shot in the perfect position with a body shot, it's just over. You are not going to be able to survive unless the guy doesn't really necessarily understand that he's that hurt and he doesn't go in for the kill. Maybe that guy's tired too. But Stipe, credit to him, man. As soon as he saw DC even start to wince with those body shots, he just kept on pouring them on him. DC continued to not defend them, and Stipe just pounced on him and just destroyed him, and he got the finish. And you have to say, man, Stipe, I don't know, like, anybody who's debating who's the greatest heavyweight of all time, honestly, I just don't understand. Like, people are saying that Fedor is still the best, and Fedor was a phenomenal fighter and all that stuff, but what Stipe's doing is just, I don't know, I think it's sensational. Like Fedor, if you look at his record, he fought a lot of cans. There isn't a single can that Stipe has fought. Like, realistically, like, arguably the worst fighter he's fought was Fabio Maldonado. That doesn't really count because Fabio was, going in, he was a replacement fighter who was just taking on a very short notice. Stipe, it was a heavyweight fight, so that doesn't really count. But if you look at heavyweights, like, realistically, yes, he fought Stefan Struve, who knocked him out, but that was early on in Stipe's career, and Stefan Struve was actually looking like a very dangerous contender back then. People forget about that, but Stefan Struve was looking very, very good early on in his UFC career. So it was, of course, not a great loss, but it wasn't, of course, this huge career-defining loss. And then from then on, he lost to Junior Dos Santos, who was an absolute monster back then. He avenged that loss by knocking him out in the first round. He avenged the loss to DC, who is arguably the best, who was arguably the other best fighter in UFC in heavyweight history. So what he has achieved, knocking out Alistair Overeem, knocking out Fabricio Verdum, he's just done literally everything you could possibly imagine. The only thing you could possibly say is that he probably, in order to be the true elite greatest of all time, like just undisputed, would have been to defeat Cain Velasquez when Cain was in his prime. But it just didn't pan out. They were in different stages of their career. So I personally think that Stipe Miocic, after this win right here, has proven that he is the undisputed greatest heavyweight of all time. Now, they could still potentially do a trilogy because, of course, DC hasn't decided yet if he wants to retire. And I don't think there's really any remote interest in seeing DC versus John Jones anymore because, John Jones, he already knocked him out once. He already beat him the other time. Does anybody really want to see that fight happen? Not really. I think the only fight to really make right now is literally, for DC, of course, unless DC just wants a fun fight against a lesser opposition, then fine. But realistically, if he wants a big fight, it has to be the Stipe trilogy. That is it. And I think that Stipe would probably give him the rematch because he is a stand-up guy. Maybe it'd make him suffer for making him wait for a year, but honestly, I don't think that Stipe would do that type of thing. I don't think that's really his game. So I think that he would definitely give him the rematch, and realistically, man, the winner of that could easily be the greatest heavyweight of all time because DC could easily win that fight because he was winning the first 3 rounds. He literally won the first 3 rounds, so it was like the opposite of the first one, only it went longer. Like the first one, Stipe was winning, and then he got caught, and then basically the same thing happened with DC, only it went to the fourth round. So it was a phenomenal fight, man, and like I was talking about the Romero versus Boachinha fight, it's definitely a fight of the year contender because of the stakes. Like Romero versus Boachinha, I think was more spectacular. By the way, Romero was just hilarious, but like that fight was more spectacular in the pure, just like the fact that those two guys were just constantly throwing, whereas this one was a lot more technical. But I will say that this fight had a lot more on the line, so it could definitely rise above it in terms of how important the fight was and realistically like what it means. So they could definitely be fight of the year. We'll see what happens. There's still plenty of excellent fights, and there have been some other excellent fights throughout the course of the year as well. So we'll see what happens, man. But this was definitely a great one of the best title fights we've seen. Probably the best heavyweight title fight I've ever seen, to be honest with you. So just a hell of a fight. Hats off to DC. If he does call it quits, then hats off to DC on an amazing career and easily being one of the top heavyweights of all time, one of the best fighters of all time. And most importantly, like I said on Instagram, man, like not only is he a great fighter, but he's as good outside the cage as he is inside the cage. He has so much potential as a commentator, as an analyst, and he's just a great man. You can just tell, man, this guy exudes just family man qualities, and he is just a phenomenal human being. So no doubt about it, this guy has nothing but great things coming for his future, and I wish him all the best as well as for Stipe as well. So guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comment section down below if you think that DC should retire and who you think is the greatest heavyweight of all time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, guys.